Welcome to our course on the Shifting Romance with Israel. This would be sort of an introduction to the course, the overall content. And the reason I'm doing this is not only because it's germane to the launching of the course and to help us have a broader perspective as to where we're going, but also because I haven't had the opportunity yet to field your questions, to interact with you, which I'll be doing in weeks that follow. So let me just continue with our discussion on the nature of our particular course. Now, the relationship between the United States and the Zionist movement in the State of Israel has been the focus of much historical scholarship over the years. And the attitudes of American evangelicals and fundamentalists towards Zionism and Israel have been explored in depth. But really, it's only now, in more recent years, and in particular with this dissertation, that historical study has been focused in depth upon the unique relationship between the Jewish state, Zionism, and one of the most preeminent forces in world religion today, 21st century American Pentecostalism. The large majority of evangelical denominations have demonstrated positive attitudes toward Israel. Yet the American Pentecostal sense of bond with Israel has as its uncommon and distinguishing source a radically primitivist New Testament ideology. Pentecostal ideology effectively bypassed 18 centuries of church history and upheld the first century Jewish Christian milieu, the Book of Acts, as the idealized and lost model of Christian experience needing to be fully regained in order for sacred history to reach its climatic fulfillment. A failure of the Zionist enterprise, that is the establishing of the Jewish state, would have had a highly challenging impact upon evangelicals and fundamentalists and required significant adjustments to their historically minded ideologies. But the same Zionist failure, or the failure of the Jewish state, or the plowing under of the state of Israel, would have an utterly devastating after effect on American Pentecostal ideology and would threaten the very self-understanding and survival of classical American Pentecostalism. While evangelicalism generally welcomed Zionism as part of the pending eschaton, Pentecostalism needed Zionism to a far greater extent, since Pentecostalism drew its identity, not like the others from the annals of Christian history, but from the radical primitivist ideals of the earliest Christian church, as observed in the historical book of Acts, which presumed a Zionist reality. The failure of the Zionist experiment would call into question the Pentecostal restorationist interpretation of history, and hence their own Pentecostal significance. Now, given the phenomenal expansion of Pentecostalism, not only in the United States but worldwide, to now include more than 500 million Christians among all faith traditions, it's crucial to understand the sources of the Pentecostal ideology of Israel and the Jewish people. And such an inquiry may shed new light on the prevailing American support of Israel and lead to a better appreciation of the significant roles played by religious groups in determining the relationship between the United States and Israel long into the 21st century. The historical role of the Jewish people within the classical Christian ideological scheme of salvation history has constituted a crucial dimension in the history of Jewish-Christian relations. Many movements through Christian history postulated that the Jewish people constituted an insignificant or even sinister force within salvation history since the first century rejection of Christ, while others anticipated that a nationally restored Israel and Zion would play a key role in the apocalyptic second coming. Christian responses to the question of Israel's ultimate agency in the eschaton and salvation history largely determined the nature of the historical relationship between Christians and Jews for most of 2 millennia. Now, previous historians have recognized the primary differences that have existed between Catholics and Protestants with regard to Israel, but in our course we're looking more specifically at the Pentecostal connectedness with Israel. In the decades surrounding the turn of the 20th century, many bewildered and discontented Americans expressed their disillusionment with much of Protestant Christianity's traditionally staid liturgical expression. They complained of the modern liberal trends toward higher criticism of the Bible and Darwinian evolutionism that had ruined the active Christian faith of many. But these years simultaneously witnessed an intensification of widespread revivalist expectation that God would soon restore the modern 20th century church to its pristine, apostolic, first century essential form and practice. And the first evidences of divine intervention to effect apostolic restoration came on the very first day of the 20th century at Charles Parham's Bible School in Topeka, Kansas. But by 1906, news of the Pentecostal Azusa Street revival in Los Angeles, under the pastoral tutelage of Parham protege William Seymour, the son of sharecroppers and former slaves, had electrified tens of thousands across America. And Pentecostal revivals would soon dramatically spread to parts of Western and Northern Europe, as well as Central Asia. By 1999, the Pentecostal movement worldwide included in excess of 900 million adherents among nearly every Christian tradition, and was broadly recognized as the most important Christian religious movement of the 20th century. Now it's Pentecostalism is recognized basically as the third force in global Christendom. The American Pentecostal movement was birthed over the first decade of the 20th century against the social altering backdrop of spectacularly improving systems of transportation, industrialized manufacturing, the widened use of electricity and the telephone, the grip of corporate monopolies, and the politically new American global expansionism. This indigenously American Christian movement, sweeping through growing cities and towns, surfaced amid the social cauldron of rapid dislocation from rural to urban existence, and found a ready market among the numbers of domestic migrants and alien refugees filling the poorly equipped and overcrowded industrial inner cities. From Pentecostalism's most primitive foundational years in the 1900s, it quickly established for itself a divinely sanctioned direct linkage with the Zionist aspirations for a Jewish state. This connection was observed in the revivalistic ministry of Charles Parham and in the rapidly developed teachings of the latter rain, which advocated that the contemporary days of Pentecost, in fact, were the latter rain counterpart to the Book of Acts' former rain experience on the original day of Pentecost in first century Jerusalem, viewing their tongue speaking as the initial evidence of both the full restoration of the church to its radical first century apostolic nature and the pending culmination of salvation history in the immediate future. Early Pentecostals seized upon the contemporary rise of Zionism in 1897 as a divinely issued and reliable witness that the ultimate moment of the eschaton, the truly last of the last days, had arrived. The Pentecostal romance with Zionism and the Jewish state that has ensued in all the decades since has survived the many challenges of the 20th century with its fluctuations along the way, as the winds of political, social, and religious change have twirled and swirled this one-sided romance for 100 years. And so the research we're investigating now will demonstrate, for the first time, the earliest sources for the Pentecostal romantic sentiment towards Zionism, and chronologically follows the bends and twists of this ongoing and often uneasy romance over the 20th century. American Christianity generally ignored the early Pentecostal revival, finding it to represent the irrelevant and archaic emotional expressionism of lower-class religious enthusiasts. But the more hostile evangelical and holiness sects, those much closer to the aspiring Pentecostal movement, both in terms of devotion to biblical literalism and eschatological expectation, largely repudiated Pentecostals for arrogating to themselves Hebrew prophecy, dispensationally thought to be fulfilled only in Israel's future millennial kingdom. Yet Pentecostals relied more and more on their coincident connection with Zionism to reinforce their Pentecostal basis for existence. They considered the 20th century restoration of the Pentecostal tongues distinctive to the church to have been divinely synchronized with the providential undertaking of the Jewish national restoration in Zionism in preparation for the second coming. Pentecostals deemed both restorations vital to global readiness for the Messianic Advent and hoped for the utopian millennial renovation.